Welcome in to Greenville Grit, Greenville residents in touch on 103.7 WTIB. This is the local show that keeps you connected and in touch with the issues that affect what's happening in your community. Greenville Grit is sponsored by Ribeyes, Kid Construction, and Greenville Toyota. Now, here are your hosts for Greenville Grit, Terry Williams and Michael Overton.
Good evening and welcome to Greenville Grit. I am Terry Williams.
And I'm Michael Overton. Terry, good to see you from a distance today because we have a guest, but the guest is on the line with Representative Brian Brown. Brian, are you there?
I am.
All right. Well, we're gonna do our quick introduction like always, and we'll get with Brian to kind of talk about what's going on. He is in Raleigh today, working hard for us in the middle of a long session up in Raleigh. So before we get the show started, Terry, we always got to thank the sponsors that allow it to go on. So thank you so much to Ribeyes Steakhouse for being a continuous supporter for us. If you're looking for a good steak or a good salad bar, go mention the Greenville Grit, and you can get a surprise. Don't know what it is, but go see them. They're at the corner of Arlington Boulevard and Fire Tower, as well as the location in Williamston. We have to thank Greenville Toyota if you're looking for a new Toyota or Scion car or a new used car. Go see Craig Gillis and the Greenville Toyota team. Also, they got a great service department, tires, parts, whatever you need for your car, and good customer service. They're located across from Fresh Market in Greenville, as well as online, greenvilletoyota.com or 321-3000. And the Overton Group Real Estate Professionals, serving all of Eastern North Carolina. And commercial real estate leasing, sales, business brokerage, residential brokerage, property management, and pretty much you name it, whatever we do it.
That's right.
So we're going to take exactly. We're going to take our 2-minute commercial break, come back, and we're going to get on with Representative Brown and find out what's going on in Raleigh. Be back in 2. Welcome back to the Greenville Grit. I am Michael Overton, along with my co-host Terry Williams, and on the phone with us today is Representative Brian Brown of District 9 here in Pitt County. Brian, you there?
I am.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on the phone with us. I know you guys are in the middle of a long session, and I'm always trying to learn the political side of things for the public, help people understand the difference between a long session and a short session.
Well, first of all, it's great to be all with you guys. I'm glad to get a nice voice of reason back in Greenville on a long day here in Raleigh. It's good to talk to you guys.
Well, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really just what it sounds like, to be honest with you. The long session is really, it happens in the odd number of years of the biennium and lasts, anywhere from 6 to 7 months, depending on, some of the agenda items and policy issues that the legislature may be facing. The short session will then happen in an even number of years, and typically, would last no more than 3 months at the very most. So, the long session definitely takes the crux of budgetary issues, major policy items, and those type of things. And really the short session is more about tweaking budgetary items, maybe moving a little more legislation that maybe just fell victim to time constraints in the long session, and setting ourselves up for different interim committees and things that the legislature might want to study, like tax issues, transportation issues, or medical issues, and get some real definitive answers on those things before we would come back for yet another long session in 2017, as it were.
All right. Well, thank you for that description.
Great.
So I think you gave us a good introduction to maybe some questions. One of the items in the Daily Reflector today, you probably haven't seen the newspaper today, but they're obviously pounding the Senate budget that was put forth, and one of was it Progress North Carolina is the one who claimed that they were trying to get rid of 8,000 teacher assistant jobs. Why don't you talk about where we are in the budget process? I know that you're with the House side, but if you can speak for the Senate, please do, but even where the House is and where we are overall in the budget process.
Yeah, sure. I never speak for the Senate. That's a good general rule. But, it's interesting. You look at it, both the House, obviously the House started the budget process this year. And, we were just talking about this morning and dealing with some of the things that, from a policy perspective, that's actually contained in the Senate budget. But, the reality that we have to face as legislators and certainly as the public, the bill that we passed out of the House, the budget that we passed out of the House will certainly never become law. The budget that is being, kind of worked through the Senate process right now will never be signed into law. The rubber really meets the road once we get both budgets out, the thought process out, the conversation out, and then the House and Senate leadership get in a room and start to really kind of knock out the major policy issues and what they really want to see and what we want to see move forward for North Carolina. Teacher assistance is definitely something that has certainly been a hot button issue, as many voters in Pitt County will recall. One of the reasons I actually voted against the Republican budget back in the previous long session during my first term was because of the deep cuts to teacher assistance. And certainly my position has not changed on that. I'm very happy to report that the House budget that we did pass over to the Senate did fully fund teacher assistance in the state of North Carolina. You're looking at about a 50 or so teacher assistant loss in Pitt County if the Senate budget would pass as it stands right now. I can tell you that those are meaningful positions. Those are positions that do help with the education of our kids here in Pitt County and across the state. And we need to do everything we can to retain that. I certainly understand some of the Senate's positioning on it in terms of, wanting to really put dollars into harder to fill positions that, are really, when their purview, extremely important to the future of our state. So I understand what they're attempting to do, but we have to kind of strike some sort of balance here, somewhere in between, I would assume. But definitely an absolutely important budget item, and it's something that we need to look at retaining. And I hope that we move much closer to the House version, as you can imagine, than the Senate version as it stands, particularly in the education budget.
Yeah, I think, Brian, what happens to me as just a citizen here, sitting here in Greenville, looking at just this article in the paper and even listening to what you're saying is when you're up there in Raleigh making the decisions like this that are affecting us on our everyday life, and don't really, and not you personally, but overall don't seem to see the value in our teacher assistants, makes us feel like that Raleigh's out of touch with what happens to us on a daily basis and our kids and our teachers in the classrooms. And I know that's hard for some to relate to because they haven't been in the classroom, but before they start, because this isn't the first teacher assistant cut, so before they start cutting again, I believe that they need to spend not one day in the classroom, but maybe a week and just see really what goes on in those classrooms and how important those teachers' assistants are to the teachers, but to our students for them to get what they need out of the education in those younger grades. It's just so important. A teacher can't handle, 30 kindergartners by herself all day long or 30. And some of our classrooms aren't that large, but most are, or handle that kind of, stress and cover everything they need to do with those kids in those young grades, really K through 3. But I think right now it's mostly a concentration of K through 2. But this article in the paper said that statewide 7,000 positions have already been cut since 2008. So if this 8,500 were to go through, and like you say, you don't think it will, and we certainly don't want it to, that would be the largest layoff in state history, they say.
And to the point of the article, and this is, we always caution people to really,
right.
Read what you read with a grain of salt, and
right.
certainly explore it further. And Progress North Carolina is certainly a very left-leaning group that has a very, very direct message in what they're trying to accomplish. When you really look at what's going on in the legislature, there's 120 members in the House, there's 50 members in the Senate. Everybody has a different view, a different agenda item, and everybody's trying to get their policy matter in place.
Right.
When you look at some of the teacher assistants that's been cut, a lot of those have actually come through flex cuts, meaning that the legislature didn't actually make cuts to all of those teacher assistants, although there were teacher assistant cuts. So I want to make sure I'm really clear on that. But there were flex cut abilities for the schools to be able to put dollars where they felt the resources needed to be, whether it was a teacher assistants, whether it was in salary increases, whether it was an additional classroom teachers, textbooks, whatever they felt like they needed to put the dollars into. Okay. Certainly not the makeup of that entire 7,000 teacher assistants, but a chunk of it nevertheless.
Right.
And from an ideology perspective, you do have members who believe perhaps that fully funding or maybe further funding exceptional children's classrooms, academically gifted classrooms is a much better investment in North Carolina than what they would consider a teacher assistant at the kindergarten level, as an example. So you're trying to work through those policy issues, and you're trying to make your case, perhaps get some members maybe in a classroom, and it goes both ways. In terms of some counties don't even have academically gifted classrooms.
Right.
So I think that's an
right.
absolute disjustice that we're doing, and we have to figure out how we can offer those students that perhaps are in some of these more rural areas that, from a funding perspective, they just can't afford to have academically gifted classes for their super excelling children. How do we get those kids further engaged? How do we really extrapolate all of their success and what they can potentially provide this state in the future? So it is a balancing act, and how we deal with that is certainly a difficult decision.
That's right. Well, that's true, because it isn't all about K through 2. So what you're saying, certainly makes sense. And each school board locally has to decide where the funds best spent.
Well, Brian, I had a question on, and this was something that we talked about with you last year, was the voucher system for the private schools. I believe, is the North Carolina Supreme Court considering that right now, or what is the status of that program?
It's continuing to go through the court process. It's back and forth. It is being funded. It's being utilized. We have some great success stories from across the state of students being able to take advantage of the voucher program and really have, a different opportunity. And maybe not a better opportunity or worse opportunity, but a different opportunity. An opportunity for them to be able to excel in an environment that perhaps they weren't able to do so previously. We continue to look at what we can do to strengthen the program, not just from a funding perspective, but also from a reporting mechanism perspective, and how we ensure that those schools that are receiving the funds are providing outstanding academics and an outstanding experience. For those cohort of students that are taking advantage of the voucher program. I've been obviously as one of the main bill sponsors coming out of the program that passed 2 years ago. I obviously continue to be very, very supportive of it, continue to see the value in it, and would love to be able to see it expanded.
Yeah, and I do. I agree. I mean, I think it's a great program, especially for families who can't afford a $6,000 or $7,000 a year school, to have that ability to supplement some of that income. And I don't know, it's disheartening. There's so much opposition to it when you do. And we've heard locally of success stories. There was a kid last year in Oakwood, and I think Oakwood let him stay without knowing if it was going to get funded or not. But it was a wonderful opportunity for him to get the attention he needed to excel. So,
That's right. It's interesting. I just had this conversation with a couple of our board members yesterday, who obviously are very much opposed to the voucher program, and I totally understand and respect their opinion on it. But I think what gets so lost in the conversation is this isn't public school dollars. These are my tax dollars. Michael, these are yours. Terry, these are yours. These are the tax dollars of the people, and education is not owned by the public entity. It's owned by us as taxpayers in North Carolina. And who better to decide what the best educational opportunity is for their children than myself as a parent and you guys as parents yourselves. And it could be for a whole host of different reasons, and it doesn't just have to be academic. It could be for religious purposes. It could be for maybe a specific program in arts or science that their public school just doesn't offer them. It could be to escape a situation that they feel from a bullying perspective. There are so many things as to why a parent chooses something over another item, just like we do in the free market each and every day.
That's right. Well, what can you tell us about updating about the mortgage interest deduction, and maybe a little discussion on this sales tax?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
Redistribution. So if we could talk about those two items before we run out of your time.
Sure. And I apologize that I do have to run to committee here very shortly.
That's okay.
The sales tax redistribution plan, I am glad that you kind of asked about that. I am very much opposed to that plan. I don't want to be extremely vocal on it, but at the same time, I don't believe it's the right thing to do. I believe that the communities like Greenville, when you have such a transient environment, you have so many people who commute in to Pitt County, as an example, to work and shop and those sort of things, taking those dollars away from Pitt County and sending it back to a county of origin does nothing for what is trying to be accomplished, in my opinion. I think what you're actually going to do is you're going to while you're trying to prop up a county that's not achieving economically like perhaps a Pitt County is, you're going to start to really downgrade a county like Pitt County when you have roads that are being traveled on, and you have, really essential services from fire, rescue, you name it, that, really depend on the funding for these individuals that are coming into the communities. I just don't believe it's a good policy, and I certainly, under no circumstances, would support it.
Well, I wonder, I can only imagine the impact it would have on the Outer Banks and the beaches.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Huge.
Absolutely.
Well, Brian, what else can you say, too, about the taxes? I know there was some discussion about corporate tax rates, but then there's some service tax comments that have been out there, which,
sure.
For Terry and I's business would or could affect us. And what do you think about that?
I think, the Senate is certainly still wanting to further, engage in tax reform and comprehensive tax reform. What I would personally like to do, I think we've done some great things on the tax reform front. I think that we're seeing some great progress and, quite frankly, some great returns. However, I don't feel like we've gotten quite enough empirical data to ensure that, the things that we've done don't need further tweaking. I would love to see, perhaps another biennium go by, another tax cycle go by to fully understand, the great successes I think that we've accomplished with the former tax policy before jumping in again and further, changing the tax environment. At the end of the day, if we can look at lowering personal income tax, we can look at lowering the corporate income tax, we can put more money in North Carolinians' pockets each and every pay period. Well, I'm all for that, and obviously that'll stimulate the economy and do great things for businesses across the state. I want us to make sure we take a good, steady, measured approach to it and really do the right thing so that we don't hurt future revenues for the state. And that's not that's certainly not a tax and spend comment. That's just we want to make sure that we don't rip a Band-Aid off, and we do it in a very measured approach and do it in incremental processes so we don't shock the system.
And Terry, probably have another maybe minute or so with Brian. Any of the last questions? Or Brian, do you have any comments for us in the last minute or so that you have?
As always, I just always like to thank everybody for their support. Politics is a different beast, and you can't agree with absolutely every issue and every situation. It's coming to the whole of the parts that we try to work through, and we just hope that folks remember that they can always call our office, always call my cell phone, and we'll certainly do everything we can to express our position and hear their issues or their take on a particular policy item, and do everything we can to make sure that we hold up Pitt County and do great things for the community.
That sounds great, Brian. We really appreciate all your hard work. I don't think until we sat in the desk, we probably don't know exactly what you all have to go through every day, but we really, really thank you for being on and for continuing to keep everything in front of the public so they can hopefully understand what's happening to them in Raleigh is going to affect what's happening to them in Greenville.
Brian,
thank
you, man.
I appreciate you guys letting me come on.
Well, no problem. Thank you for your time. And again, that was Brian Brown, District 9 representative up in Raleigh at a committee meeting to go to. So I had to cut it a little short today, but it was good just to be able to spend a few minutes with him, Terry. And
great information.
I think it's probably a good time to take our second commercial break. Since we just finished with him, we'll come back and maybe you and I can just chat. Hopefully, can fill up our time and not have cricket sounding. But we'll be back in 2 minutes.
Sure we can.
And we'll finish our show. So we'll be back in 2.
Welcome back. We've had a great discussion with Brian Brown, our representative, telling us what's happening in Raleigh and all the work that they're trying to get done in this long session. We didn't really get to talk too much about mortgage interest deductions, but it's my understanding those are going to stay in place, but we'll have a cap. I think it's $20,000 cap of all deductions, something like that. So there's been discussion. We didn't really get to talk about that a whole lot. But
well, and I think that's the thing is there can be some discussions had that need to be had. I mean, if you don't look at new ideas, new ways of doing things to improve yourself, you can't get anywhere further as a state or as a business or really whatever you're doing. So, I mean, I think although the more I hear about the sales tax redistribution doesn't sound like a positive, the initial discussions were, you know what, that's something we need to look at. And I think you've got to look at those ideas, say, is this something that would be good for the state? And I think for some areas, especially the rural areas, it would be very good, but it would be a huge detriment to our area. I mean, when Greenville swells during the day to such a huge population, especially on the medical side of our community. I mean, it would be a lot of money. I can't remember. The paper had it a couple months ago. It's like $1.5 million, $2 million a year in revenue that would disappear.
It would. I think it really would help us. Well, I think it bothers everybody just looking at it on the basis of what it is when they're talking about cutting our personal income tax from 5 3/4 to 5, and cutting commercial income tax. They're going to have to make up for it somewhere else.
And let's be real, they're not really cutting taxes. I mean, if they're going to move it from one side
they're
to
just
another,
moving it around. And now they want to tax services. That's been a huge discussion, which would hurt our industry. And I understand now they're looking at the pet industry, taxing the pet industry more for services rendered on your pets. So
I remember, and I mean, granted, I was young here, but I remember back in the I think it was the late 80s, early 90s, and they came out with the luxury tax. You remember that?
Right.
And the luxury tax was only supposed to appeal to cars like over $30-some thousand, to boats over like $100,000.
That's right.
And I forgot, it might have had houses or whatnot. But here's what happened. Because, I mean, we sold water ski and marine products. We didn't sell to the boaters that had boats over $100,000. We sold to what my dad always called Wally Weekender, the guy that's out on the lake and in his $15,000
ski boat or whatever. Yeah.
All sales stopped because they assumed that tax applied to everyone.
Right.
It absolutely killed the boating industry of all boats. And so you've got to be so careful when you make such a drastic change. And I have to say, I'm going to agree with Brian on this one. You made some big changes to the taxes last year. It's the first big changes in 40, 50, 60 years, a long time. Let's see how they work. Give it a year. Give it 2 or 3 years, or 2 or 3 tax cycles. What's the impact?
That's right.
What is where the economy is? What kind of impact is that going to have? And you're making a small change here, a small change here, but to do such a drastic overhaul within a 2-year cycle,
I agree with
that could have some dire consequences.
Yeah.
And I understand. Look, I'm all about getting your corporate taxes down because we want to incentivize these companies to come in. But we also need to be looking at making sure we have the incentives to bring them in. I mean, I'm a huge reader of automotive news. I love cars.
Right.
And so I've been reading a whole lot about Volvo. And
that was very disappointing.
And Automotive News isn't looking at this from a North Carolina standpoint.
Right.
They're just reporting on it. And I look at it and they're saying 4,000 jobs is what they're looking to bring into outside of Charleston.
Right.
I mean, think about, had that gone
the impact
in
it would
Eastern
have
North Carolina?
Eastern North Carolina.
And that is Volvo's jobs.
Mm-hmm.
You imagine all of the suppliers that go in around those parks and near the port of Charleston, if that would have gone where they could have gone out of Moorhead or other places in North Carolina, the huge economic impact. And I know you and I, we talk and get really frustrated even with our city council of having that vision. We're competing against other municipalities within our state, but we're competing against municipalities all across the nation.
Well, I would like to see Raleigh go ahead and get this settled because we need to be competitive, and pretty soon they won't even look our way because we don't have things in place to be competitive, and it takes us too long to get them done once we learn about the idea.
But you're talking about just from a North Carolina standpoint, which you're right. We need to, because when all the auto plants and large manufacturers, Boeing was another one, went to South Carolina. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're getting it done down there.
They need to look at South Carolina's model and see what's happening because it's working.
They brought BMW in, which I always heard BMW had an opportunity to come here in the early 90s, and we didn't get them either.
No.
And so that's that. But I'm talking about on the local level, locally. This city is competing against other cities.
That's right.
Statewide, nationwide. We've got to have our infrastructure. We've got to have economic development. We've got to have vision. And I'm not saying everything has got to be about business and pro-business, but if our environment isn't that people enjoy doing business here or wanting to put jobs here,
that's right,
then they're not going to come, and therefore our tax base isn't going to increase. People aren't going to be moving here, which would obviously cause tax base not to increase.
That's right.
And you have that downward effect. Mm-hmm. And you look at some of the small communities in Eastern North Carolina that have dried up to nothing. One of them, I'm not going to mention it, but 15 to 20 minutes away from here, that 40, 50 years ago, per capita was one of the wealthiest in the state of North Carolina. Now they don't have, I think, maybe one retail store.
Yes,
there's nothing left.
Sad.
Because they did not want to change. They did not want to look for the future and say, what can we do to be competitive?
That's right.
Very frustrating.
It is frustrating, but it's true. Also, there was I haven't kept up with this very much, but there was also a bill, this might have been taken care of by now, but about the aesthetics of when you're building, changing the government stepping in and saying what a home builder can use, what style, what if the garage opens from the front or the side.
Well, they already do that on
if they
commercial
can
buildings.
use brick.
They already do that on
but
commercial.
We
Not
need
in
to be
Greenville.
very careful how far our government goes in our daily lives. I
Well,
mean, that is really stepping
you
in.
talking about from a municipal standpoint?
Yeah, every standpoint.
Well, I mean, and you get into towns like I think Summerville, South Carolina was a good one. Very strict. Williamsburg, Virginia, perfect example. You have got to fit in aesthetically with what they want. Yes, it can have benefits,
Right.
but it can deter people from ever wanting to do any business in that town.
It could be mind-boggling, really, for them to be able to tell you what color you can have, whether or not you have brick or vinyl siding or hardy plank.
Well, we got to wrap it up. It's the end of the show. So thank you for joining in. Catch us again on Friday night, 6:30, Saturday morning, 9:30. And again, we had Brian Brown on, so thank him for being on as part of our show. Until next week, we'll see you back on the Greenville Grit.